one of the things that people watching this will think is we need to get people like, I mean, it's too late for Annabel Sharma's mum, but we need to get people vaccinated. And yet there is something about the beginning of this vaccination programme, which we hope is going to be the light at the end of the tunnel, which feels sluggish. We know that Israel is cracking on at breakneck speed. We know that India manufacturing millions of doses of vaccine. Why are we stuttering?
Well, we need to do everything we can. You're absolutely right to accelerate the number of people who are vaccinated for the reasons that you've quite rightly articulated. So far, we've vaccinated just over 1 million people. We hope to make sure that that's over 13 million in the middle of February. The numbers are increasing all the time. But of course, you're absolutely right. We need to do everything we can in order to accelerate that process.
We need to vaccinate, as you say, around 2 million people per week. The current rate is 300,000 per week. How many vaccines do we actually have right now? And how many people and places do we have in order to do them?
Well, we have millions of vaccines that are coming online, and it's also the case that we have an army of people in the NHS.
Okay, sorry, I didn't say coming online. I said how many vaccines do we have right now?
We have millions of vaccines right now, and we're making sure that they're being distributed to GPs who are responsible for making sure that the most vulnerable are vaccinated. We're also making sure that people in care homes are vaccinated, and also that frontline NHS staff are vaccinated as well. The numbers will be increasing this week, next week, and the week after.
So when will 2 million people a week be vaccinated?
By the end of this month.
Is that an absolute guarantee?
We're doing everything we can to increase numbers.
I ask about absolute guarantees. I want to play you a clip of the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Sunday talking about schools.
Should parents of primary school children in England send them to school tomorrow morning?
Yes, absolutely, they should in the areas where schools are open.
On the back of that, 6 times the Prime Minister assured us that schools were safe. On the back of that, millions of kids went back to school yesterday and mixed amongst each other and mixed amongst their teachers, and then went back to their homes with their elderly relatives. And then they heard at 8 o'clock last night from the same British Prime Minister, schools were now so dangerous they all had to be closed immediately. Can you explain to me how it is that that decision was taken when it seems to have created a potential public health disaster of millions of children all mingling at the height of this second wave of the pandemic for one day only and then going back to their homes?
Yes. The chief medical officers across the United Kingdom told us yesterday that we needed to move to level 5, the highest level of alert because of the pressure on the NHS. That judgment was made yesterday. On the basis of that judgment, in Scotland and in England, it was decided that we should close schools. But of course, across the United Kingdom, the last thing that we wanted to do, literally the last thing that we wanted to do, is to close schools, because we do know that children who are not in the classroom don't get the same level of teaching and learning and education.
But we all agree with that, Mr. Gove. Here's the problem. We all agree with that. I've got 4 kids. They've all been through education and different ages. You know, one's at university. He's not at university. He's having to do it online. My young one, went to school for one day. What is the point of sending everybody out for one day when the numbers building up to that interview with the Prime Minister were catastrophically bad anyway? It was bleedingly obvious to everybody that this was going to have to happen. Keir Starmer said, it's obvious we're going to have to shut the schools. And yet there's the Prime Minister once again giving completely false hope to the people about the fact that these schools are completely safe, said it 6 times, so everybody goes back in. And again, I just ask, at what point did you not think this was a terrible idea, given the state of the infections, particularly in the south at the moment, to send millions of people into classrooms to mingle with each other? It just seems to me that even to a complete dimbo, this is the worst possible thing to be doing. And then it turns out we do it for one day. That is why confidence is so low in your government right now.
Well, I do take your point. And the first thing that I would say is that in the south, in London, in Kent, and elsewhere, primary schools were closed. The second thing is that primary schools, of course, will remain open for children of key workers and children from the most vulnerable circumstances, and they will be safe in those schools. The appropriate steps are being taken and have been taken in order to ensure that we can provide education for those. But you're also right, Piers, that we reluctantly came to this conclusion, but the advice from chief medical officers was given to us yesterday, and we took the steps that we consider to be...
OK, what about another decision? OK, let's turn to something else which has just baffled me from the very start of the pandemic. And that's what happens to people when they arrive at UK airports. I'm reading in the papers today that the government is now going to make people take a test before they fly into the UK, and they have to be negative 72 hours or closer to their flight. Is that, first of all, true?
Well, we'll be making announcements later today and in the days ahead about how we will make sure that our ports and airports are safe. And it's already the case that there are significant restrictions on people coming into this country. And of course, we're stressing that nobody should be travelling abroad. But I don't want to preempt the specific advice that's going to be given.
You understand how there would be general incredulity if we finally, 9 months after this pandemic starts, bring in measures to control our borders, given that we have systematically refused to do this from the very start. At the height of the first wave, we let 20 million people come in without any testing programme for them, without any requirement for a negative test, without any enforced quarantine. That's gone on ever since. And now finally, talk about horse bolted, we're finally going to consider doing it. And yet everyone we've interviewed about this for the last 9 months has assured us that there were scientific reasons not to do it. So if you do bring in that measure, are you conceding, finally, that the British way of doing this has been completely wrong? Because most other countries in the world have had a far stricter requirement. We just interviewed somebody from Australia earlier, which treated it like an island, as did New Zealand, as did many other countries. Very heavy, draconian restrictions when you go into those countries. We've never had this. Why?
Well, we have had quarantine measures, and we have had people who've been prosecuted for breaking those quarantine measures.
How many people have been prosecuted?
I don't know.
Could you hazard a guess?
I don't believe in guessing.
I don't believe it's been enforced. So that's why I'm asking you.
Well, it has been enforced. I know...
How many people have we tested at the airports since the start of the pandemic?
Again, I don't believe in guessing, so I'll come back with the appropriate figures. But on the point about prosecution, I know that people have been prosecuted for breaking these quarantine restrictions, and it is the case that these quarantine restrictions were brought in specifically on scientific and medical...
If you do now bring in a requirement to have testing before you get to this country, is that an acceptance by the British government that you were simply wrong about this and that we should have had this requirement, as almost every other country in the world has had to go into their countries? We should have protected our borders better from the start, because that's what everyone is baffled by, is why have we just allowed our island to just let anybody in without any real controls?
Well, I defer to the experts on this, and it is the case that we've followed advice about what the safest method is of making sure that we can effectively isolate and quarantine people. But of course, it is the case that as more evidence emerges about what the best thing to do is, we look at that. It is the case that flights from particular countries at particular times have been restricted. Flights from South Africa are currently restricted, of course. There was a period when it was impossible to travel from Denmark because of the new variant linked to outbreaks.
Would you come back to us? Would you come back to us after this interview and just tell us how many people have been prosecuted for breaking quarantine who've come into the country, and also how many people we've tested at UK airports since the start of the pandemic? I think people are entitled to know those figures.
OK.
Absolutely, I quite agree.
Michael Gove, I want to ask you a couple of things before we have to let you go, and that is, as the mother of somebody whose A-level results were messed around with during the summer, and who is mother of a son whose GCSE results were messed around with at the end of the summer, I want to know, like many parents, what is going to happen with GCSEs, AS levels and A levels and BTEC qualifications this summer?
Well, it's a personal matter for me as well, Susanna, because my daughter is taking her A levels this year and my son is sitting his GCSEs this year.
And will they?
Well, the Education Secretary is talking to the exam regulator, Ofqual, because, as you quite rightly pointed out, we had a very, very difficult summer in Scotland and in England last year with exams, so it's important to get this right.
Are they cancelled, Mr Gove? Because there are thousands and thousands of students who heard the government, the Prime Minister yesterday saying that they won't go ahead, in the format that they should. They don't know what that means. Are they going to take tests in the summer or not?
There will be alternative arrangements which will make sure that children are assessed so that the knowledge they've acquired, the skills that they've developed can be appropriately recognised.
OK, so no exams, but an assessment.
Assessments, yes. And of course, the details of that will be announced, I think, in the House of Commons tomorrow. Okay. But for the reasons that you mentioned earlier, it's important that we get this right. It's particularly the case that children from poorer backgrounds suffer more as a result of not being in school, in classrooms, and it's also more difficult for many of them to access the remote learning.
OK, but just to establish, because we need to make this crystal clear, because students need to know what they are aiming for. Their exams are cancelled this summer, but there is likely to be a system of ongoing assessment, so they should still be studying as far as they possibly can.
Oh, absolutely.
OK, and just finally, you said that we're going to get to 2 million vaccinations per week by the end of this month. Now, the Prime Minister said last night that he hopes to vaccinate the top 4 most at-risk categories by mid-February. If you only got up to 2 million a week by the end of this month, you're only going to have half the number in that top 4 vaccinated by mid-February, which means that these lockdown restrictions are going to last a lot longer, aren't they?
Well, we're increasing the numbers every week, and the numbers will continue to rise of those that we're vaccinating, and we'll provide weekly updates on the progress that we're making with as much detail as possible. But on the point about lifting restrictions, we'll review them on the 15th of February. The very first thing we want to do is to try to lift restrictions on schools for the reasons that we've discussed, but we can't predict with absolute accuracy what restrictions we'll be able to lift. We'll keep them under review. OK,
Mr Gove, we've got to leave it there. Just want to say one thing. Everything depends on the vaccine rollout. We need hope. This country's back in another national lockdown. We all hate it. I'm sure you hate it. Your family hates it. We all do.
It's devastating for
whatever
children,
whatever you're spending
on
this vaccine rollout in terms of manpower to get them done, double it, treble it, quadruple it. It will be money well spent. Just please give us that assurance that you will throw the kitchen sink at this.
Yes.
Thank you.